A millionaire CEO found a homeless teacher in an abandoned school. What he did next shocked everyone. There are some nights that whisper instead of shout. Nights when the city softens just enough for something unexpected to happen. That's exactly the kind of night it was in downtown Austin when Grant Ellison, a man who owned half the tech that powered the city, walked out the back door of his own gala and vanished into the streets. He didn't leave a note, didn't tell his driver, just vanished. Inside the glittering rooftop ballroom, investors clinked glasses under chandeliers and toasted to another quarter of exponential growth. But Grant, hair immaculate suit, tailored smile perfectly practiced, felt like a ghost in a house he'd built. It wasn't the money. He had more than he could count. It wasn't the success. Forbes had called him a visionary 3 times in the last year alone. It was the silence, the kind that followed him home and lingered like smoke. So he walked. The streets of East Austin were quiet. That time of night, shops closed, traffic thinned. He pulled his coat tighter as the temperature dropped. The wind carried a chill that had no business in Texas. It stung his cheeks, but he kept walking until he saw her. A flicker of flashlight through a chain-link fence. A rustling of fabric against concrete. There, sitting on the stone steps of a long abandoned elementary school, was a woman wrapped in layers of mismatched sweaters. Her knees were tucked to her chest. Next to her, a teenage boy, no older than 13, clutched a paperback book, squinting at the pages in the dim light as she read aloud in a soft, even voice. The building behind them was boarded up its windows, graffitied its door, chained shut. Grant paused. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the voice, the rhythm of a once-loved bedtime story. Maybe it was the way the woman's free hand instinctively pulled her coat tighter around the boy's shoulders. Maybe it was because her words were clear, even in the dark. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. She read, her voice warm, unwavering. When she turned the page, her fingers trembled from the cold. Grant stepped forward slowly. "It's freezing out here," he said. The woman turned, eyes sharp. She didn't look frightened, just tired and guarded. "We're fine," she said. "I didn't mean to intrude," Grant replied. "Just..." He hesitated. "I have extra blankets in my car. Or a place to stay. I can help." The boy looked up, curious. But the woman held his gaze. "He's got school tomorrow," she said. "We'll be gone before sunrise." Grant nodded, trying not to look surprised. School. He's still enrolled. One of the last in the district that didn't shut down yet. She paused, then added, "He's not mine. But he doesn't have anyone else right now." Her tone wasn't defensive. It was matter of fact. Like she had explained this before to strangers who didn't listen. He knelt slowly, not too close. "At least take this." He shrugged off his coat and handed it to her. "For the night." She hesitated, then reached for it carefully, only after glancing at the boy who nodded almost imperceptibly. She wrapped it around him first. Grant stood. "I'm Grant," he offered. She didn't give a name, but as he walked away he heard her whisper, "Thanks. For the kid. Not for us, not for me. For the kid." It was a small distinction, but it stuck with him, because in that moment, Grant Ellison, tech titan, AI architect, media darling, was reminded of something he hadn't felt in years. Relevance. Not the kind that fills headlines. The kind that fills silence. And as he stepped back into the night, coatless in the wind, he didn't feel cold. He felt awake. The next morning, Grant Ellison sat in his high-rise apartment, 38 floors above a city that never looked back. The skyline stretched wide and glassy, the kind of view people paid millions for. But Grant barely noticed it. He hadn't slept. The coat was gone. The boy's wide eyes were still in his mind. And the woman who read stories like they were sacred, haunted the edges of his thoughts like a song he couldn't shake. Her voice had pierced something. He tried to distract himself, opened his inbox, scanned a dozen pitch decks, ignored the messages from his assistant, reminding him about his upcoming appearance at the state capitol's Education and Innovation Forum. Bring vision. The note read, "Talk about the AI literacy program rollout." Vision. He'd said the word so many times, it didn't sound like anything anymore. By mid-morning, he'd called in sick for the first time in 5 years. And by noon, he was sitting in front of an old laptop. Not his usual interface, Googling school closures in Travis County. The results were bleak. Budget cuts, layoffs, student performance scores used as blunt instruments to justify shutdowns. Over a dozen elementary and middle schools closed in the last 3 years. One article caught his eye: AI assessment tools fail to capture true student growth. The firm mentioned in the article, an early-stage startup Grant had personally backed 4 years ago, excited by its promise of efficiency in education. He remembered the pitch: no more underperforming teachers, no more wasted tax dollars. At the time, it had sounded like progress. Now all he could see were boarded windows and children reading by flashlight. He clicked deeper, skimming press releases, scrolling through city records. One familiar name kept resurfacing: Mariah Jones. Fired after 17 years of teaching, Budget Review flagged her special education class as underperforming. Parents had protested. The district held a hearing. Nothing changed. The school closed 6 months later. The building decommissioned and scheduled for demolition next spring. Grant leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. That's where she was. Not a shelter, not a bench. Her school. She hadn't just been camping out. She had returned to the ruins of her life. And in that place, broken cold, forgotten, she still read stories to a child who wasn't even her own. That night, Grant returned to the neighborhood. The steps were empty. No sign of Mariah or the boy. Just the wind in his coat folded neatly under the base of the flagpole. It still held the shape of someone small. He picked it up, brushing dust from the fabric. The school's marquee sign above him was cracked but still faintly legible. Foster Elementary, where learning begins. He swallowed hard. Something sharp and ancient was rising inside him. He hadn't cried since his father's funeral, but now the edges of his eyes stung, because the truth was undeniable. He had built an empire that erased people like her, and now that he'd seen her, he couldn't unsee. 2 nights later, Grant found her again. He'd driven by the old school 3 times already, pretending he wasn't searching, until he saw the flicker of a battery lantern through a broken basement window near the side of the building. He parked discreetly, crossed the lot on foot, and approached slowly, hands visible, careful not to startle her. Mariah Jones was inside, just barely. She sat on a flattened yoga mat near the far wall, sorting supplies into neat piles: books, canned soup, old lesson plans she must have saved from her classroom days. A portable camping stove hissed gently in the corner. The boy was there too, curled up under a sleeping bag, headphones in. Grant tapped lightly on the metal frame of the doorway. Mariah looked up instantly, on guard. "I didn't bring a coat this time," he said, "but I did bring dinner. Fresh, warm, no agenda." She stared at him. He held up a paper bag: tacos and rice, 1 sweet tea, 1 water, I guessed. A long pause. "Leave it there," she said, finally pointing to a crate near the wall. Grant set the bag down, then stepped back, giving her space. He waited, not expecting anything. But to his surprise, she opened the bag right away. The boy stirred, half awake. She handed him the sweet tea without a word. He sipped and leaned against her shoulder. Only then did she speak. "Why are you back?" Grant hesitated. "Because I can't stop thinking about you. About this place. I thought I was helping people with my work. Turns out I was helping systems, not people." She didn't respond. "You were a teacher?" he added softly. "I read about the closure." Mariah's face didn't change, but her eyes shifted slightly. "They called my kids unteachable," she said, voice low. "Autistic, dyslexic English learners. Too messy for the algorithm. So they shut the lights off and called it strategy." Grant nodded slowly. "And you?" "I fought it," she said. "Got labeled disruptive. They offered me a quiet exit with a severance I never saw. A beat. And now here you are. A tech king at my doorstep with tacos." "I'm not here to fix you," Grant said gently. "I'm here because I want to listen. Because I think I've been part of the problem. And maybe now I want to be part of something else." Mariah studied him. She didn't soften, not yet. But something shifted. Her body didn't flinch the same way. Her jaw didn't lock so tight. "I've had a lot of people want to help," she said. "They usually disappear once they realize I won't play grateful." "I don't need you to be grateful," he replied. "Just honest." She let out a short laugh. "Honest, you sure?" Grant nodded. Mariah motioned to the cracked window. Then start by sitting. Ground's cold, but you'll survive. He did. They sat for nearly 2 hours, eating slowly, talking sporadically. She asked him why a man like him would care. He told her about his mother, a public librarian who'd raised him on books and secondhand jackets. About how he'd built his company to make life easier, only to realize he'd streamlined humanity out of it. When it grew late and the boy had fallen asleep again, Mariah handed him a children's book. "I used to read this to my class every Friday," she said. Story time was the one part of the day the state didn't monitor. Grant flipped through the pages quiet. Then Mariah added almost as an afterthought, "Thanks for not treating us like a headline." Grant looked up. "I wouldn't know how." As he left, she didn't say goodbye. But she didn't tell him to stay away either. And that he knew was something. A week passed. Grant didn't go back to the gala circuit. He stopped answering calls from shareholders. And when his CTO, Evan Pierce, asked why the national AI tutoring launch had been delayed, Grant simply replied, "We need to revisit the impact model." Evan scoffed. "The impact is 8 million users by Q2. Schools can't afford live tutors anymore. We're offering scale, efficiency." Grant closed the laptop in front of them. "Efficiency isn't education, Evan. It's just faster sorting." The conversation ended with a terse silence and an unspoken threat the board would hear about this. But Grant no longer cared about quarterly applause. Something deeper was unraveling, something that didn't fit on a spreadsheet. That evening, he met Mariah behind the school again. This time, she was waiting. She handed him a paper cup of instant coffee still steaming from the little camping stove. He took it startled. "You trust me to bring dinner, and now you're making the coffee." Mariah smirked. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I just had an extra packet." They sat against the brick wallbacks to the graffiti-stained exterior. The boy, Caleb, she finally told him, was helping pass out donated socks at a local church's closet that night. "He likes feeling useful," she said. "That's rare at his age." Grant nodded. Then he said something he hadn't told anyone in years. "I dropped out of medical school." Mariah turned to him, surprised. "I wanted to be a trauma surgeon," he said. "But I froze during my first clinical rotation. The noise, the chaos. I couldn't handle not having control. So I built a company where I could control everything. Code didn't bleed. Software didn't cry." Mariah was silent. "I told myself I was still saving lives, just differently," he added. "But now I'm not so sure." After a long pause, Mariah spoke. "I love teaching," she said, almost whispering. "Even when it was hard. Even when we had no supplies and 30 kids in a room made for 20. I stayed late. I brought snacks from my own pantry. I learned Braille just to help one blind student feel less alone." She exhaled slowly, and they still called me obsolete. One algorithm, one funding review, and poof, 17 years gone. Grant looked at her, his throat tight. "I'm sorry." She didn't nod, didn't say thank you. She just said, "I know." The wind picked up brushing dust across the lot. For a while they just sat there, two people who had once chosen different kinds of battles. One with code, the other with chalk, and lost in different ways. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "Every day," she said. "Would you go back if you could?" Mariah chuckled bitterly. "Where the schools are closing, Grant, the ones left won't touch someone like me." I spoke up. "That's the kiss of death in education." Grant stared down at his cup. "I want to fix that," he murmured. Mariah looked at him sharply. Don't what? Don't make promises. Don't swoop in with tech and whiteboards and think it changes anything. This system isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was designed, to forget people like me." He met her gaze steady. "Then, maybe it's time we break the design." Mariah didn't reply, but for the first time her eyes didn't harden. They softened. Barely. Enough. It started with a photograph. Mariah hadn't meant to see it, wasn't looking for dirt or secrets. But the morning had been cold, and Grant had invited her to a quiet downtown cafe with Wi-Fi so she could send off a few job applications. He'd stepped away to take a call, leaving his tablet open on the table. She hadn't touched it, but the screen lit up when his email refreshed, and her eyes involuntarily landed on the subject line. Strategic exit from Edumetrics Inc. Board discussion slides. Her pulse quickened. Edumetrics. She knew that name. She clicked just once. And there it was. A presentation deck. Slide 2, historical investment timeline, key early backers, a list of names, Near the top, in bold, G. Ellison founding investor, 2019. Mariah didn't need to read more. She already knew. Edumetrics had built the algorithm that assessed students like data points, ranked them, flagged them, filed them under cost burdens. It was their system that led to her classroom being labeled inefficient, her students non-responsive, her job redundant. The program that had ended her career, he had funded it. Grant returned to the table. Moments later, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, mid-sentence about literacy tools. But Mariah was already standing. "You were one of them," she said quietly. Grant blinked. "What?" She turned the tablet toward him. He froze. "Oh," he whispered. "You invested in Edumetrics," she said. "You made me disposable." His expression crumpled. "Mariah, no, that's not... It wasn't like that." She didn't raise her voice, didn't cry. Her stillness was louder than a scream. "I trusted you," she said. "I let you into my world, into Caleb's life. And all this time, you were part of what destroyed it." "I didn't know," Grant said. "I swear. I thought, back then, I thought we were building something that would help. I pulled out of the program weeks ago. That's what you saw. But you got rich off it first," she said. Her voice razor sharp. "You built your empire on the backs of kids like mine? Then what? You show up with tacos and a guilty conscience." "It's not guilt," he said. "It's regret. And maybe for the first time the desire to do better." Mariah stared at him, shaking her head slowly. "You don't get to just rewrite your story because it makes you uncomfortable. Some of us had to live in the wreckage you left behind." She turned to go. He took one step after her. "Please," he said softly. "Don't walk away like this." She paused, then looked over her shoulder. "I'm not walking away," she said. "I'm just walking back to a life where I don't mistake curiosity for care." And then she left, shoulders tight, coat pulled close, leaving Grant alone in the cafe with 2 cups of coffee and the taste of something bitter and permanent in his mouth. The door shut behind her with a soft jingle, but it echoed like thunder. Grant Ellison stood on the edge of the pedestrian bridge over Lady Bird Lake, the wind pressing against his back like a challenge. The city sprawled beneath him, indifferent and glittering. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything he hadn't wanted to admit until now. He didn't call Mariah, didn't send a dozen apologetic texts or knock on the school's basement door. Instead, he started doing what he should have done from the beginning. He showed up in silence and action. First, he sold his shares in Edumetrics. All of them. He didn't wait for the board's approval. He didn't negotiate a favorable exit. He just withdrew. Then he made it public. An open letter printed in the Austin Chronicle and shared across education forums. "I once believed data could replace dialogue, that metrics could replace memory. I was wrong. I invested in systems that hurt the very people I claim to support. I can't undo what's been lost. But I can stop profiting from the pain. I'm walking away. Not for applause, but because it's the only decent thing left to do." No hashtags, no logo, just a signature. Grant Ellison. The reaction was swift. Some applauded, others mocked. His PR firm called it career self-sabotage. Grant didn't flinch. While they debated optics, he walked the East Side neighborhoods alone, asking questions. Real ones. About which buildings had closed, which kids had nowhere to go after 3 p.m., which community leaders were still trying quietly, thanklessly. And then he found it, a shuttered public library on East 9th Street. 2 stories of dust and silence, windows clouded, paint peeling. But beneath it all, bones that had once held stories. He remembered Mariah's words. "They didn't break me. They erased me." He wouldn't erase her. He'd build around her. Using a combination of personal funds and quiet grant channels, he signed a lease under a private LLC with no trace of his name. He hired a small crew to clean the place up. No branding, no cameras, no social media fanfare. Just space and hope. At the front desk of the cleaned-out library, he left a sealed manila envelope addressed to Mariah Jones. Inside, a photocopy of the lease agreement for the building. A letter of transfer giving her full operational control, and a handwritten note. "I didn't come to fix you. You didn't ask to be a symbol, but you reminded me what real impact looks like. This is yours, or not. No conditions, no strings. Just a door open if you choose to walk through it. Behind the letter was a faded photograph. A classroom from years ago? A woman, young radiant arms outstretched, reading to a circle of children sitting cross-legged at her feet. Chalkboard behind her, paper stars on the ceiling. Mariah. He'd found it in an archive district press release titled, "Teacher of the Month, Ms. Mariah Jones inspires with heart." On the back of the photo, he'd written 5 words. "You were never forgotten? He left the envelope with the pastor at the church where Caleb helped on Thursdays, asking him to pass it along discreetly. Then he stepped back. No follow-up, no reminder, no hint. He simply waited. Because he finally understood, proof doesn't come from what you say. It comes from what you're willing to give up. The envelope arrived on a rainy Friday afternoon. Mariah found it tucked between the pages of a donated book. The church pastor handed her a small smile, tugging at the corner of his mouth. "He asked me not to say anything," the pastor said. "Just said you'd know what to do." She almost left it unopened. But something, the weight, the handwriting, the silence, made her sit down on the cold tile floor of the church office and open it right there. Her hands shook as she read. By the time she reached the photograph, the one she didn't know existed from a life that felt like fiction now, her chest had cracked open. She read the note 3 times, then folded it back into the envelope and whispered one word to the quiet room. Okay. On Monday morning, Grant sat in the old library's side room, now stripped of dust but still bare bones, going over local nonprofit contacts when he heard the front door creak open. Footsteps, light, deliberate, then her voice. "You didn't even try to put your name on it," she said. He looked up, startled. Mariah stood in the doorway, rain still clinging to her jacket, her curls slightly damp, but her eyes steady. "I thought about it," he replied honestly, "but it didn't feel right. This isn't my story." She crossed the room, taking in the space, the cleared shelves, the natural light through the tall, newly washed windows, the quiet hum of potential. "You really meant for me to run this?" she asked. "I meant for you to lead it," he said. "Build it into whatever kids like Caleb need. Reading corners after school, tutoring weekend meals, whatever matters. I'll fund it, quietly. You decide everything else." Mariah was quiet for a long time. Then she walked to the center of the room and turned slowly in a circle, visualizing something Grant couldn't yet see. Finally, she turned to him. "I want book drives," she said, "on the first Saturday of every month. Story time every afternoon. And we partner with retired teachers who still want to serve but don't know where." Grant nodded, smiling faintly. "Consider it done. Oh, and coffee," she added. "Decent coffee, for the parents who come in and need 5 minutes to feel human again." He grinned. "I'll make sure it's not instant." Mariah studied him for a moment. "I don't forgive easily," she said. "I'm not asking you to," he replied. "I don't forget either." "I hope you don't." They stood in silence for a few heartbeats. Then she extended her hand. He took it, not with force, not with a grip meant to impress. Just a simple, firm grasp that said, "I see you." "I don't need a savior," she told him. "I'm not trying to be one," he said. "I'm just tired of being part of the problem." Her hand lingered for another second before she let go. Then she gestured toward the dusty back corner. "We start there. Shelving goes in first. We build around the books." Grant looked at the spot she'd chosen and nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Mariah turned away, already cataloging in her mind what needed to be done. But as she walked past him, she added quietly, "You can stay, if you're willing to build something real." Grant's voice was low but sure. "I wouldn't have come if I wasn't." And just like that, something unspoken shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the space where trust could live. They had no blueprint, no volunteers, no staff. But they had a building, a shared memory of what mattered, and, for the first time, a mutual understanding. This wasn't redemption. This was rebuilding, together. 1 year later, the building on East 9th Street didn't just have new paint. It had heartbeat. The outside still bore its original brick face, but the windows were now filled with hand-painted signs made by local kids. "Welcome to the reading room. You matter here. Open books, open hearts." Inside, shelves overflowed with donated paperbacks and picture books. Colorful rugs softened the tile floors. There was a small snack station near the front with juice boxes and granola bars. Always stocked, never rationed. In the center of it all stood, Mariah clipboard in hand, ponytail swaying as she directed a group of volunteers setting up for the Saturday morning story circle. The children were already gathering, some seated cross-legged, others curled in beanbags. Caleb, now taller and with more confidence in his voice, helped set out cushions and passed out bookmark kits to the newcomers. He still showed up early every week, not because he had to, because now he belonged. Grant entered through the back holding a tray of warm pastries from the corner bakery. His sleeves were rolled up, tie loosened. He didn't wear a name badge. No one needed to know he paid the bills here. To most, he was just the guy who refilled the coffee. Exactly as he preferred it. He caught Mariah's eye as he crossed the room. She gave him a brief nod, their unspoken shorthand for, "We're okay, keep going." Today marked 1 year since she'd first read his letter, and 1 year since she walked through the front door, not as someone needing help, but as someone with a vision. They celebrated without speeches, no ribbon cutting, no media invite, just a pancake breakfast in the courtyard, a performance by a high school jazz trio, and tables lined with sidewalk chalk and blank journals. Estas es wendio, in ma de baikio. At noon, Grant watched as a little girl with thick braids read her very first sentence out loud, and her father, seated beside her, wiped his eyes behind sunglasses. At 12:15, a retired teacher, Mr. Jensen, offered to host a weekly math mornings program. At 12:22, Mariah found Grant restocking books and handed him a folded piece of paper. "Names stau spend." "What's this?" he asked. "Read it later," she said, "when the place is quiet." He tucked it into his coat without question. Later, long after the last child left and the lights dimmed, Grant sat alone near the picture window and unfolded the note. "We don't undo the past by regretting it. We undo it by planting something better in its place. Thank you for the soil." "Oh." He closed his eyes and smiled. This wasn't salvation. This was a beginning. A second chance, not just for them, but for every story still waiting to be read. Some stories don't end with fireworks. They end with a door that stays open, a chair pulled out, a quiet voice saying, "You belong here." Grant Ellison never imagined that a chance encounter outside a crumbling school would be the turning point in his life. He had built empires from code-engineered systems designed to predict everything, except the weight of one woman's dignity, and the way it could undo him piece by piece until something honest was all that remained. Mariah Jones didn't ask to be saved. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted dignity, restored, voices heard, and futures rewritten. Together they built not a foundation of charity, but one of respect, of shared power, of healing that runs deeper than apologies. The reading room became more than a literacy center. It became a reminder that small intentional acts, a warm meal, a quiet seat, a handwritten note, can create ripples no algorithm can calculate. And while neither of them wore capes or gave TED Talks about impact, they did something far more lasting. They stayed. They showed up again and again, until the place that once echoed with silence began to sing with stories. Not just the ones in books, but the ones still being written. Every single day,